We're happy to welcome Kim DiDomenico to the center as part of our interview with Tennessee veterans. I'm Chris Magra, I'm the director for the center. It's our mission to record veteran stories and to preserve those stories for the future. Kim, welcome.
Thank you.
And would you mind starting by telling us where you were born and telling us a little bit about that town you were born in?
So I was actually born in Chicago, Illinois. I was little when my parents moved from the city to the suburbs, but I grew up in a town actually called Fox River Grove, and it's a suburb of Chicago. Small town, no street lights, so about 12 houses on the block. Just a nice little small ranch house, and my parents were both working, and I had two younger sisters and lots of neighbor kids to play with and stuff. But it was a nice little. At that time, it was very rural. So now it's still a little rural, but definitely things have changed in the last 35 or 40 years at this point. So.
And what did your family do? Were your parents involved in the military in any way?
They weren't. My dad has seizures, so he was not allowed to enter in and stuff like that. And my mom was home raising us, so they didn't. I have family members that have been in and stuff like that, but my parents didn't go at all.
Did you grow up hearing stories about those family members who were in the military? Did any of that early experience kind of influence your decision to enlist?
I think it did a little bit, because I had uncles that were in during Vietnam. I had some cousins that had enlisted, some various branches of service and stuff. And one thing that people chuckle about now and stuff is I graduated high school at 17, and of course I thought because I was done with high school I could have free reign of everything, which I was still a minor at the time. And so my mom started saying it's no longer a curfew anymore, it's a house courtesy rule, since my parents had to get up and go to work early. So I joined the military because my parents had too many rules. Which there's usually that weird awkward pause and stuff at that point of, wait a second, the military had less rules than your parents. How did that happen? And but of course at 17, you think you knew everything.
Yes.
And
I
went in.
And you thought, my parents in this household, there's a lot of rules and regulations, so I'm going to get away from that and join the military.
Yep, sure did. I tried to pay for college myself because my parents couldn't afford to, so I was trying to save for that.
Yeah.
So that all transpired about 3 weeks after I graduated high school, where I went in on delayed entry program.
What did your mom and dad say when you first broached the subject of the military?
I think at first my mom was like, where do I sign? Because of course I was not really a hoodlum per se, but I was definitely pushing the boundaries at that point because I was done with high school and I didn't turn 18 until September. So my dad was very quiet, and they both had to sign for me to go in since I was still a minor. But then of course when they didn't understand, I don't think, the ramifications of them signing and the conflicts and stuff that I could have been involved with by going in. I mean, I signed in a peacetime, but you never know that.
But you enlisted when you were 17.
Mm-hmm.
You were underage.
I was.
And a combination of you having this year of rebellion and your parents kind of wanting you to have a set, established life for yourself, maybe a career for yourself. Did you think about it in career terms when you got in, or did you just think, as a 17-year-old girl, I'm gonna have some adventures here?
I did. I actually joined the military aside from to get away from my parents' rules. I joined it to travel.
Okay.
And what's really interesting is I ended up stateside my entire time. I took my basic training at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, my schooling at Fort Lee, Virginia, and then I was stationed at an Army depot in the middle of New York my whole time. So
Had you traveled much prior to
not really.
17? Okay.
No, my parents, my mom's girlfriend had a farm in Ohio that we would go to and stuff, and then my grandparents would rent a cabin once in a while in Benton Harbor, Michigan, where we would go with them. But aside from that, it was pretty low key. You know, picnics in the park and things like that were our summer entertainment. So.
So you had this desire to see the world.
Yep.
And thought maybe the military would facilitate that. Why the Army?
I actually wanted to go Air Force,
Okay.
but when I looked into it, there was a 2-year waiting list. And at the time I was like, yep, nope, I need out. And so I had some friends that I was playing basketball with near the Army recruitment station. And of course the recruiter's like, so he started talking to us and stuff, and there were about 5 of us that would play, and 3 of us actually enlisted. So so it worked out well for me because I was able to go down the path that I really thought I wanted to go down and stuff at the time. So
what initially sparked your interest in the Air Force?
From what I understood, it was a little more lenient than the Army.
Gotcha.
I had a cousin that was in, and the stories that you hear, between Marines and our, they all talk. So so I was like, Air Force sounds really cool. And then when that was a 2-year waiting list, I was like, yeah, I can't wait 2 years. So
you entered the Army and you went to basic training. You said the basic training was in South Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
What year was that?
1987.
Okay. What was that like as a woman in the Army in basic training in 1987?
It was very interesting because the drill sergeants we had never had a female platoon before. So their expectations were that we could hold the same rigor and stuff that the men could do. And obviously that was not the case. And what was even more interesting is I shipped out the Monday before Thanksgiving in November, and then we basically had to take a 2-week leave at Christmas time. And they were like, make sure you stay with your running and your push-ups and your sit-ups and stuff. And of course they knew as soon as we got back in January who had and who hadn't. And so it was, and it's the typical, drill sergeant mind games anyways, but it was much more stringent because we were the first female platoon they had through.
And did you form bonds with the other women in the platoon? Did that help you to get through that? It must have been a real trying time.
We did, and our battalion had both males and females in it, but obviously the companies were separate. But we did have certain groups that were able to kind of help each other, because you have to build those bonds as you're going up Victory Tower and things like that. You have to work as a team, So, and there was we always had a little bickering and stuff, but all in all, at the end, everybody came together.
Did you write home to your parents while you were in basic training, or did you just kind of say goodbye to Chicago for a while?
No, because mail call was huge. Sometimes you were so tired at the end of the day, though, where your mail just went under your pillow and you read it the next day. But mail call was huge, and they wrote quite a bit. Mom did, but writing back and forth, was huge for me. Some of my aunts would write. I believe my sister did too. But mail call was huge. It was just that connection to home. Even though you wanted to be away from home, it was still that connection.
Were you close with your sisters?
We were.
And did you talk to them about your decision to enter the military?
No. When I went in and stuff, my little sister was 9, so she was pretty young, and my other sister would have been 15. So. We might have bickered a little bit as kids and stuff, but that was about it. We usually helped each other out, and especially when my younger sister came along, she, there was 6 years between her and my next sister, so, Mom needed help with her and stuff, but not really a discussion. They're very happy now when I get recognized at different events and things like that. They're like, wow, it's one of those kind of reality checks of, hey, she really was in. So.
Yeah. And So you survived basic training. And then where did you go?
To Fort Lee, Virginia for my schooling.
Okay. And what was your schooling in, and what was that experience like for you?
It was in supply, so I was 76 Charlie. So I did supply in the motor pool. And actually, when I first enlisted, I enlisted for jump school too. And then as I got through my AIT...
Now back the truck up. Why did you want to jump out of airplanes?
Again, I thought that would be really kind of cool to, just build your experience and stuff like that, and maybe allow you to travel to different places. So, again, what do you know at 17? But when I was at Fort Lee for my schooling, and as I was nearing the end of my schooling, I had a lot of friends from Fort Bragg and the 101st Airborne that would come up and, visit and things like that as you got later into your schooling and you were able to have visitors.
Yeah.
And like they showed me like the scars on their knees from that constant jumping and things like that. And I'm like, yeah, maybe not. So I went and actually declined my jump school, which then had to change all of my orders and stuff like that. So it was definitely a interesting time, but I always say everything happens for a reason. So I'm glad that that I had those friends and we had those conversations.
Now, at that point when you declined jump school, did they give you another assignment, or did you get to choose another assignment?
They actually gave me my permanent party station from there then, because otherwise I would have gone to Fort Bragg for jump school. So
yeah, right. So those were your decisions, those were your choices, and then you entered into supply.
Mm-hmm.
What was that training like for you? Did you enjoy it? Were there certain challenges? What was that like?
It was pretty easy for me and stuff. To me, it was a lot like now that I've gone to college and stuff like that. It's a lot like school, basically just sitting in classrooms and learning and understanding. And of course, at the time, the computers and things like that weren't at the state that they are now. Like when I got to my permanent party station, I was responsible for $1 million worth of equipment, and it was all kept on a manual inventory list that you had to erase and change over. It was printed with a dot matrix printer, but I didn't know that, as I'm sitting in my classrooms and stuff. And but it was good. And you built different friendships there because it was folks that you would actually be all in the same MOS, going into those classrooms, and then figured out where they went and keeping in contact with them after you were done.
Now, while you're doing that training, are you thinking to yourself, maybe I could have a career here?
Not at that point yet.
Okay, still an adventure and still like, I don't know where this is going, but I'm down for anything.
Yep.
And any challenges with that training? You mentioned it was mostly easy for you. Was there anything in your background or anything in your skill set that made supply work particularly easy for you? You just naturally took to it.
Numbers I have a degree in finance and a master's in business, and stuff. So math was always easy for me through school, even grade school, high school. Keeping track of that stuff, making sure it was neat and organized, and if people came that they had what they needed. So, having that and going through the training and stuff, which it was pretty, even though it was difficult, no different than a college class, but it was still, it came naturally, I feel, to where I think if I would have done something that was a little bit outside the realm, might have been a little bit more challenging for me.
And so then you finish up your training, and then what?
Then I had to, it was like right up to the 9th hour before they found my orders and stuff as to where I was going, since I declined jump school. It was a whole reorganization. So then I end up at Seneca Army Depot in Romulus, New York, which is basically about halfway between Rochester and Syracuse. So, which I kind of chuckled about. I said I joined the military to travel, and I stayed stateside my whole time. But we get there and get settled into the barracks and stuff. you get into the motor
Was it
pool.
just you by yourself? Did anybody?
From my group go? No.
Okay, so it's just you there. How did you feel about that? Did you feel a little bit lonely, a little isolated? Had you ever been to New York before? Did you know anybody in New York?
Nope. And being like 300 miles from New York City too, because they're like, oh, you should have seen the city. I'm like, I didn't have a car, so I have no. I mean, you could have gotten on a bus or something and probably gone, but it was different because I'm typically, like I always say, if my daughter and I walked into a room full of people, we'd kind of observe and do that type of thing and stuff. We might know a couple people in their background by the time we're done. My sister and my niece would know the entire room and 3 things about each person. So going, by yourself to a location that you really don't know was difficult, and it was rural, which I was kind of used to with the house that I grew up in and stuff, so that kind of helped to adjust. I mean, if I would have came from like a big city to that, I think it would have been a little bit of a shell shock.
Yeah. And the work is familiar and comfortable.
Yeah, so that was fine. And the people in the motor pool were very helpful. They were able to explain things, get me settled in and stuff. We had mechanics there, and so it was kind of welcoming and stuff. And because I worked at like a window where the mechanics came in and looked for parts and stuff for the vehicles, you started building those relationships pretty quickly, because you had to, even if it was just a quick 5-second chit chat, you at least had that relationship.
Yeah, and the people there, you said, were welcoming. Was there anybody who did not want a woman in that area?
My leadership, yeah. My commander and my first sergeant, I dealt with a lot of sexual harassment when I was there. Even though we lived in barracks, there were co-ed floors and things like that. Not co-ed rooms, but co-ed floors. But there were like 14 of us that ended up writing letters to our congressman to deal with the situation. And
These are other women that you're
male and females.
Okay.
So both sides of it. And one day my girlfriend and I are sitting in our barracks room, and across the way is where our command office was, and this really fancy helicopter landed. I'm like, that is not a Huey, And out came a congressman, and they did a congressional investigation. And my first sergeant had 28 years in, and he had a choice to retire or get booted, and he packed his bags and ran quick. And my commander was under investigation when he came down on orders for Saudi, because I was on active duty during the first Gulf War, which I wouldn't wish a war zone on my worst enemy, but there was a long time after that it took me to be able to like sleep at night, to where you wouldn't have nightmares and stuff. So it was difficult.
Did the congressional investigation make a difference after that? Things changed.
They did, because that leadership was gone. Now the only bad thing is our new first sergeant was 82nd Airborne, so he wanted to run 50 miles a day with a full rucksack, and we were all dying. So you got to be careful sometimes what you wish for, but yeah, it was because the leadership changed and stuff like that, and they were watching things a lot more closely. And of course now it's way more public than it was back then. I mean, because I got out in '91, so and even after I got out, there were letters coming to my house, and Mom's like, they said if you want to do anything, I'm like, just get rid of it, Mom. I just kind of wanted to put that part of my life behind me. So, but prior to all that happening, career thoughts were going. I'm like, man, I'm 17, barely 18 years old, man. By the time I'm 38, I could retire.
Did people realize you were 17? Do you think your commanders?
Well, I would have been 18 by the time I shipped, because I enlisted in June. And I shipped out in November, so I would have been barely 18. I turned 18 in September.
I have a 10-year-old daughter, and I imagine in 8 years I'm still going to think of her as a little girl.
Yep.
I can't imagine being your commander and treating you a certain way as a little girl. Do you think they realized how young you were? Even 18.
I don't know. I think sometimes, people that, go down those paths and stuff, I think they're just wired that way. Even if they got out from underneath the military stuff. I think they're just wired that way, which, you know, is unfortunate, because I think I probably would have re-enlisted and stuff, but I couldn't continue to deal with that and the repercussions from it, because there were things, because you didn't do favors for them. I mean, I lost stripes over it. I mean, so I was in from 87 to 91, and I went from an E1 to an E3 to an E1 to an E4 in that 3.5 years. You know, but I said, you know, I'm gonna earn my rank based off of my job performance and my physical fitness, you know, testing and stuff like that, not off of extracurricular activities. You know, so it was really difficult to make that decision. But then when I made the decision to get out, well, first of all, I got involuntarily extended when the Gulf War started, because I was supposed to get out in November of '90. And in August,
involuntarily extended is an interesting way of putting it.
That's what they told me.
Yeah.
In August of '90, they came to me and they said, "Well, you're involuntarily extended." I said, "Well, when's that?" And they're like, you know, mind you, at this point I'm like 20 years old, and I said, well, what do you mean voluntarily extended? It's because at that time we were on a short timers calendar. You're counting down till November and crossing the days off, and they said, well, till the war's over. And I'm like, well, when's that? And they said, well, we'll let you know. And I'm like, fantastic. So of course, that particular war was really much shorter than anything with, you know, Afghanistan and Iraq and everything else like that. But so I was fortunate in that respect. But they came to me in March of '91 and said, hey, the war's done, when do you want to get out? And I gave them a week, just enough to get my stuff shipped home, and I was gone. So.
Well, it took a lot of courage to get that congressional inquiry rolling. I imagine it was difficult for you to join the other 14 people and say there's a problem here, we need help to deal with it. It took a lot of courage on your part to even try to rectify that situation. I'm wondering about your timeline here with the late 80s, early 90s, if at any point in this, the Cold War is in the back of your head, or you're thinking about it as you're serving, or when the Gulf War starts. I'm wondering if at any point in this, it's not just the math and the work that becomes something more for you?
It did, actually. You know, it was interesting when the war started. We got a postcard that on one side it says, I have deployed, and on the other side you addressed it to whomever you were going to send that to. And of course, again, you know, no computers really and stuff at that time, so you dropped it in the snail mailbox on your way to the armory to draw your weapons. And you know, I think that was the first reality check that I was like, oh wow, you know, this is more, like you said, than just my job in the motor pool and stuff. It was real. It was, you know, and
who'd you send it to?
My parents. So
you remember what you told them?
Actually, like I said, they pre-printed them for us. All it said was, I have deployed on one side, and on the other side it was addressed. That was it, you know. So, and if we actually had deployed and stuff, you know, I'm sure there would have been some other, because of course the TV was only reporting what they were allowed to report and stuff. So seeing the things on TV and really being on the inside and knowing, you're like, yeah, no, that's not really what's happening. You know? So, and actually as part of my rank changing, I was supposed to go to Germany. And, but because I was an E3 instead of an E4 at the time, that unit was the first to deploy to Saudi. So I always say everything happens for a reason. Even though I wanted to join the military to travel, Germany would have been cool, but I don't know that I would have wanted to be, you know, that first unit into Saudi during that time. So, but definitely wasn't. And then of course my mom was concerned too. She's like, oh my God, you could go to war. Those are the things, like I said, that I don't think she thought about
well, that's
when
what
she
I'm
was
thinking
signing
about
that
over
paperwork.
here as a father. I'm thinking, if I got a postcard in the mail that said my daughter had deployed
Right.
and nothing else,
Yep.
I would freak out.
Yeah, I'm sure they would have too, because you don't think about that.
Yeah.
I mean, we were in a peacetime when I signed. There was no, I mean, even the stuff going on in Ukraine now, we could get pulled over there, so there was nothing going on. I'm sure small things and stuff, but not anything, like Afghanistan or Iraq or anything like that. So I don't think Mom really thought twice about it, but
Yeah,
but when you
probably-
think about, I mean, she technically signed saying that I could, and I'm like, Mom, I enlisted just like any other person that's drafted or anybody else, I need to serve my country, so.
Yeah. And there's an added complication too, that you had wanted to get out of the military and were involuntarily extended. That I think your parents were probably thinking about too. So, talk to us about the Gulf War and some of the things that you did to support that war effort.
A lot of it was support from the motor pool side of it and stuff. We had to get, our particular unit didn't deploy, but we had a third party one up at Fort Drum, New York that did deploy. So we had equipment that we had to basically, because they sent their stuff over, so we had to send our stuff up for the folks that were left behind and stuff. So we had to get equipment up there. We had to make sure parts were ready, the equipment was ready. So and while I was in, I actually cross-trained as a mechanic, so I could actually work on the vehicles too with them. So that I understood, hey, if you need brake pads and they're not in stock, what's the ramifications of that? Because again, at 19 or 20 years old, do you really understand that? I'm way different now at this age, but so there was a lot of support that we did for Fort Drum. Like I said, I didn't really see, the folks that had gone over because they had deployed, but I mean, it was like 3 hours from our post to theirs, and a lot of that equipment got driven up, and then we got in the helicopter and flew back. So it was a nice little support effort and stuff, even though we were more supporting the folks behind still.
And you're probably listening to news reports throughout this and kind of attaching the work you're doing to this war effort overseas. Did you notice that the work you did changed? Did it escalate? Were you busier during the war than you had been before?
It was more critical to have the parts to keep the vehicles going. Obviously when you're in peacetime, it's a little less strenuous. And the fact that a lot of our parts came from significant, distances. We had to make sure we allotted, and sometimes we had more on hand, just to make sure, especially for the things that, had a lot of more wear and tear. So we had to do that, and keep track of that. And again, everything was done manually. I mean, you did a requisition card, it was carbon copy, and you sent it out, and, it went in the courier, and they took it up, and then it, to our, building to get the purchase order and stuff, and then that went out. So it was you had to really kind of think ahead to be able to get all of that data together to make sure you had everything to support those that were back here. Because I mean, if they had stuff that they ended up having to ship more troops over and more vehicles, those things had to be ready for them when they hit the ground.
And how did you mentally do all this? How did you square the circle of this bad experience that you'd had, and then being involuntarily extended with supporting the military during the war? You somehow in your head, you somehow did all that.
I think it was just part of the job. I mean, it was just, I mean, you had to. There was no going, I'm sorry, I have a headache today, I'm staying in bed. It was, especially when the war kicked up and stuff, and not knowing how long it was going to last, it was all hands on deck. There were people that, I never saw in post prior to that were involved in helping to ensure, the fluidity of things, and stuff was there when they needed it, whether it was supplies or ammunition or vehicles that were working. Definitely a little bit more heightened awareness and stuff at that time. So it was definitely way different than peacetime.
And it was the end of the war then that got you out of the military.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit about that, how that process of being discharged went?
Well, like I said, I had actually taken a position working for the post commander. My girlfriend had gone over there. She got injured in a vehicle accident. She was a mechanic. And she went over there, and because of the challenges that a lot of us were dealing with and stuff, she's like, hey, we've got this position over here. So I was actually working for the post commander at the time, doing still clerical, inventory type things and stuff like that. But so when they call me, they're like, and my girlfriend Sherry's like, hey, there's a call for you from the command office. And I'm like, uh-oh, And he's like, hey, just so you know, the war's over. And I'm like, are you kidding? And he's like, no, you need to pick your discharge date now. And I'm like, so I looked at the calendar and I said 1 week from today. And, so then, the military comes and they pack up all of your stuff and, get it into a moving truck and get it sent back to wherever you're going to.
What was your plan?
Actually, I promised my parents I would go to college if they signed for me, because they couldn't afford to pay for school for us. So I promised them that I would go to school once I got out. So I did try to stay in New York with some friends of mine that lived on post. They had some small children, and I was trying to help them out and stuff. And but I couldn't get enough money saved to go to school there, even though I had GI Bill and stuff like that. So I decided to go back to Illinois, and it was a good thing I did, because Illinois actually had an Illinois Veterans Grant too, if you returned within 6 months of discharge. So I had GI Bill and college fund and my Veterans Grant. So
what did you do with those funds?
So I went to, so I got out in March, and probably by early April I was back in Illinois. And then my parents were looking at moving to Albuquerque. So I had looked at colleges, and Northern Illinois University was actually my first choice. But they said my ACT score was too low, which I kind of chuckled at. I said I was like 16 when I've served in the military, and you're gonna tell me my ACT score is too low. So I kind of chuckled at that. So I ended up applying at Western Illinois University also, which was in rural farming community. But my parents and I were on a vacation in New Mexico with my younger sister, and we were traveling back, and then my other sister that was at home taking care of the dog and stuff like that, she's like, hey, Western just called, you got accepted. And I was like, what? This is crazy. And so on our way back from Albuquerque, we drove through Macomb and went to the campus, did our site visit. I had to do all my entry, like where do I place in English, where do I place in math, all of that. And then my mom had my sister, and they take the parents and they go to like separation anxiety. And my mom's like, yeah, no, this happened like 4 years ago, I'm good. So she took my sister, and they went to like the student union and got like a Coke or something and waited until I was done with my testing. What was interesting is my English placement, I had to write on one thing that occurred in the world that changed my life. And of course, the military was an easy write for me. Writing is sometimes challenging for me, but when they brought up that topic, kind of like the Final Jeopardy question type of thing, I was like, oh, this is a piece of cake, can I have more paper? And it was handwritten, no computers, no nothing. But then I look around this room of students that were maybe 17, 18 years old, and I'm like, yes, I'm sure that others have had things that have happened in the world that have changed their lives, but I bet you 70% of them in there were like sitting and staring at a blank sheet of paper. So it was just, it was really rewarding. So that was...
what year was that?
That was 91.
Okay. And in 91, you also mentioned that you went on a vacation to Mexico.
To New Mexico.
Oh, New Mexico.
Yep.
Okay. That was a big deal for you and your family, because you said that there hadn't been much travel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my mom always wanted to move to Albuquerque.
Yeah.
She liked that area and stuff like that. But then once the grandkids started coming, she's like, yeah, I'm not moving that far away. So she stayed close for the grandkids. So
And why was Northern Illinois your number one pick? Did you have friends that lived there that talked to you about it? Was there something about
it
the
was close to
school?
home, so which kind of goes full circle of, because I could have lived at home and commuted. So, for me, I was looking at a cost savings, and stuff of not having to pay for a dorm or for rent on an apartment and stuff, even though it would have been like a 45-minute commute each way, in good dry weather. I figured that would be good, and then I could, try to save some money and stuff to be able to, once I was done with school, to be able to get out and about and, start life.
So Western Illinois, did you study finance?
I actually started with an accounting major, but I was carrying 18 hours a semester, and I was working 40 hours a week. And
That's a lot.
it was a lot. And
Kids don't do that at home.
it was a lot. And then when I got to my 300 level tax class, and I was just struggling with it and stuff. No matter what I did, I was struggling. I was like, you know what? Yeah, I still have to work and everything. So, maybe accounting, because accounting is a 40-hour-a-week degree, just in and of itself, aside from working. So, tried to get into my advisor and couldn't. And at the time, you had a set appointment time when you went and picked your classes for next semester. And I couldn't get a hold of her, and I was like, well, I'm going to wing it here. And so I switched my major to finance, which still stayed in the College of Business, so I didn't have to redo a lot of things and stuff. But it also gave me a variety between like insurance and real estate and stuff. It made it a little bit more well-rounded. But
what were you thinking you wanted to do with that degree?
well, originally I thought I wanted to be a CPA with the first degree. With the second degree and stuff like that, I wasn't really sure at the time, but I liked the numbers side of it. Could you have used the real estate piece of it? And, so it's kind of like, we'll see what happens. We'll let it fly and see what happens. But, but it was a good experience and stuff. Now, the thing, I actually did 18 hours a semester and 6 or 9 hours over the summer. So I got to my last semester. So I started in August of '91 and I graduated in December of '94 with my bachelor's degree. So it was like 3.5 years. But I got to that last semester and I said to my mom, I can't do this. I was just so burnt out by carrying such a heavy load during the school year and not having that summer break. That that 2 or 3 classes over the summer, especially as compressed as they were, I was exhausted. And so Mom's like, no, you have to finish. You'll be really upset with yourself if you're this close and you didn't finish. So I finished in December of '94, and then I thought, well, what the heck, I'll start my master's degree.
Right after?
Right after. Okay. So in the spring of '95, I started my master's degree, and then I was like, yeah, no, I need a break. So then I actually worked at the university for a while in the benefits office. So I kind of used my finance degree with the insurance benefits side of it. So I did all of the insurance for the employees and stuff like that, and helped like the retirees, because of course Medicare's on a calendar year and our insurance benefits were on a fiscal year, so they couldn't understand out of pockets and deductibles and all of that stuff. So that was good, and then after that, I decided that I'd met my daughter's dad, and we were going to go drive a truck cross country.
At Western Illinois?
He was actually a friend of my girlfriend's.
Okay.
So, and my girlfriend and I had met in December of '91, so we've been friends since then.
What did he do?
He drove a truck cross country.
Okay.
And I said, you know what, that sounds fantastic. You have nobody to report to really, as long as your load gets back forth. And here again, I could go see the countryside. Little did I know, at 80,000 pounds rolling down the road, you don't see much other than the interstate. So
you did, you went with him to see
I
different
did
parts
until
of the
I
country?
was 8.5 months pregnant with my daughter. I drove, the doctor's like 8.5 months pregnant, 2,000 miles from home, probably not a good idea. So So it was a good time though. I mean, I enjoyed it. He was very patient, because I got my CDL, through the state of Illinois, but then he still taught me. A lot of times you have to go through truck driving school and things like that.
So wait,
I actually
you
drove.
didn't-
I actually drove. Yep. So we
Okay.
drove teams.
Yeah.
Yep. It was he did a lot of the daytime driving, and I did a lot of the nighttime driving, and we were gone like 3 weeks, and then we were home for a couple days to kind of do laundry, get some groceries and stuff like that, mow the grass, and back out again. So.
And did you enjoy that traveling? You finally got to do some traveling.
Yeah, it still wasn't the same kind of traveling that I was looking for, because we ran pretty much Interstate 80, all the way to California and back. Like I've been through Vegas, but never to Vegas, because we're too heavy to get off of 15 to go anywhere. So, but it was a good time. It was a good experience. Got me some sightseeing. So, not quite exactly what I was looking for though.
Well, when you look back on your military career, you've got some challenges that you had to overcome. You have the involuntary extenuation, and then the war. How do you think about your military service after the fact?
There were certain things that I said, being a veteran was supposed to be so great and wonderful. There's certain things that I'm kind of like, But then as my daughter got older and we were able to go to like the Veterans Day presentations at school, it was so rewarding to, especially at, in the grade schools and stuff like that. Those little kids just, as you're standing for your respective song playing and the recognition that you got, and then as she got into high school, sitting in that gymnasium on the floor with mostly male veterans, and seeing those high school kids going, could this be my career path? And seeing if anybody wanted to come and talk to you or whatever to say, how was your experience? And everybody's is different, but it was just so rewarding to sit. And then when she graduated high school, and I didn't really have that connection anymore, it was kind of sad in a way, to see. But then my previous employer, before moving to Tennessee, actually did a Veterans Day celebration. We had like a continental breakfast. They brought in speakers, and we got to sit through and get recognized and stuff. So, and actually, I'm trying to work on that at my current company here, just for that recognition, because I think a lot of veterans go unrecognized sometimes. So.
100%. You mentioned the move to Tennessee. What did bring you to Tennessee?
Actually, I've always wanted to retire in East Tennessee, which clearly I'm too young to retire at this point, but so I had to have a job. And it was interesting. I was kind of poking around at things and stuff, but I'm like, and until my daughter graduated high school, I wouldn't have moved anyways to uproot her. But then a grade school friend of mine that lived down here in Maryville, she was running into some layoffs at work and stuff, and so they said, hey, check out this website. So I'm like, what have I got to lose? So I actually, in March 31st of 21, I submitted my application. By the middle of May, I had an offer, and by the beginning of July, I had sold a house and bought a house here. So it was a whirlwind trip. Getting down here and stuff, but now I'm here, and
you plan on retiring in East Tennessee?
Yeah, I just I like the area. I mean, it still has seasons without the. I mean, when I went back up to Chicago for Christmas, it was 31 below zero wind chill. So I do not miss that at all. I like the seasons and stuff like that, and the mountains. Anytime I can be out there and kind of just get lost in the mountains. Not literally, but figuratively, it's so nice to be able to be out here. And I've got involved in American Legion Post 2 up in Knoxville, and and then I've got the East Tennessee Women's Veterans Group that Jessica Hodge is in front of. So Yeah, so it's, my veteran stuff is definitely picked up down here in addition to hiking and work and everything else, so.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.